everyone, and welcome. I'm Lisa Grissom, and I produce special events and projects for Yiddishkeit. For those of you who don't know, Yiddishkeit is an intercultural arts nonprofit founded in LA over 25 years ago that focuses on preserving and promoting Eastern European and Yiddish culture and finding points of connection with immigrant cultures and marginalized communities today. We're thrilled to have you join us for a new program called Helix to Helix. Before we get started, I'd like to bring on my partner in this project, Claire Fester, the director of the Wallis Annenberg Helix Fellowship. Hi, Claire.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the fellowship?
Sure, I can. I'm so excited that we're kicking off this series today. It's been a long time in the making. This summer actually will be 10 years since I myself was an Annenberg Helix Fellow. So I've been running this program for a while. As you said, I'm the program director for the Helix Fellowship, which is Yiddishkeit's flagship program created by our executive director, Rob Adler-Pekara. Many of you in the audience are probably longtime followers of Yiddishkeit's work and you know all about Helix. But if you're new or need a refresher, this is our traveling residency that brings artists and scholars to formerly majority Jewish areas of Central and Eastern Europe to learn about the history of cross-cultural collaboration in the region. And this is a year-long fellowship that then goes on to support new creative work inspired by a fellow's time in residency with us.
Great, thank you for all that. A little bit more about today's program. So we came up with the idea of pairing Helixers for an hour of unrehearsed conversation to reflect on their fellowship experiences and to share how it has influenced their artistic and academic practices. And we're really curious to get an update on their current projects, of which they are many. So we have our own interests as well. Yeah, go ahead, Claire.
Yeah, so to give you all an idea about our format today, Lisa and I have curated a series of questions and prompts for our guests to have kind of an unrehearsed conversation. And these questions are touchstones and guidelines, but our speakers are obviously free to let their curiosity take the conversation wherever they choose.
Great, so let's go ahead and bring on our pair, Zoe Aqua and Itamar Manoff. Manoff.
Both are good.
Both are good. I practiced and then, yeah, I like them both. Okay, great. So Itamar, why don't you kick us off and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for organizing this. So I'm Itamar, and I am a PhD student here at the University of British Columbia in the Department of Educational Studies, located on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples, aka Vancouver, BC, Canada. And I am doing research into educational philosophy, language education, and the philosophy of education, and ethics. And I also am a community educator, and I teach and learn languages. Right now I'm teaching a little bit of Yiddish, and I've taught other languages before. That's what I'm doing.
Great. And I just want to say that this is a little bit of a reunion because we all went to Belarus and Lithuania together in 2019. So it's really exciting. Zoe, so fill us in a little bit about what's going on with you and who you are and what you're up to.
Yeah, so I'm my name is Zoe Aqua. I'm currently based in Cluj-Napoca, Romania, in Transylvania, working on a Fulbright grant about folk music education, learning from folk musicians there and talking to them about how they learned how to play and how they're passing on their traditions. My kind of main genre that I normally play is klezmer music. And I'm also active as a composer and a performer, as well as teaching a lot. So I'm currently doing a little side thing in Budapest, trying to learn Hungarian, which I think will help me with my research in Transylvania. There are a lot of Hungarian speakers there. And so I have a lot in common with Itamar as a fellow educator, fellow person who's really interested in educational methodology and also languages. I'm really excited to talk to Itamar today.
So great. So we're going to leave you to it. Have fun, enjoy. Thanks for being so courageous and jumping into this new program. And we'll be behind the scenes if you need anything.
And for everyone out there in the audience, feel free to share your questions or comments in the Facebook and YouTube comments, and we'll get to some of them towards the end of the broadcast.
Have fun.
So,
Hi, Itamar.
how's it going?
Good. How are
I
you?
guess I'm good. I'm excited for all the things we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
And I guess we start with the poetry, which is an amazing place to start. So maybe we can give a little bit of a context of why we're starting with the poems that we've chosen, specifically with Helix. Maybe we can just like mention it, and then if you have anything to add. So one of the things that's amazing about the Helix Fellowship is that it really integrates poetry and literature and cultural artifacts, specifically poetry, as part of the program. So during our retreat in Ojai, and then throughout the program and in Eastern Europe, we always start our day with a poem, either a Yiddish poem or a poem of another kind of amazing poet from somewhere in the world. And that kind of like really set the tone for the day and opened conversations and inspired us, which I thought was like a really good idea and kind of a really neat educational kind of way to bring people together.
Yeah. Maybe I'll start with my poem.
Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to share this annotated copy of this poem that is from a workshop that we did as part of Helix in Ojai, California, which was part of the sort of process we did before going to Belarus and Lithuania. And this was from a really incredible workshop by the amazing Hannah Kronfeld. Kind of went into the poem in detail, talked about the words and sort of just taking it apart, which I think was, to me, a really powerful way to get into this poem. And I just got really inspired by it and ended up doing a musical setting of it on this album, which is available, which I'll talk a little bit about more. But I'll just go ahead and read it and then read the English translation as well. And just apologies for any Yiddishists out there. I've been in Romanian head and Hungarian head, so if my pronunciation is off, don't at me. Okay. Der Zeil es ihm, sie hat vergeben, sich nicht gekannt ihr treuerig Gemüt. Ist sie gegangen durch ein Leben mit sich anschuldigende Tritt. Der Zeil, als sie hat besenteut, geschützt getrei mit heuler Hand. Das Feuer, was es ihr gewinn vertreut, und in eigenem Feuer gebrannt. Und wie in schon von Übermut, hat sie mit Gott sich schwer gewehrt. Wie tief gesungen hat das Blut, wie Zwergen haben sie zerstört. So this poem is really intense. I forgot to mention it's by Anna Margolin, who maybe, Itamar, you can talk a little bit about her if you want. And I'll read the English translation. Tell him she couldn't forgive herself for her despondent mood, so she went through life with self-effacing steps. Say that until her death, she faithfully protected with bare hands the flame entrusted to her, and in that same fire she burned. And how, in hours of exultation, she took God to task, how her blood sang deeply as dwarfs destroyed her. So, yeah, it's pretty intense. I think one thing that Hannah Kronfeld pointed out was the really kind of Deutschmerisch quality of this poem. There's no words from Lashon Kodesh. There's no Hebrew-derived words. And that and sort of the whole thing about her blood singing deeply and these dwarves coming in and destroying her, to me felt very Wagnerian. And it demanded this sort of weird art song Wagnerian inspired treatment, which eventually kind of became the musical setting for this poem.
Yeah, and I have to say, just listen to your album on the way here, and I listened to the rendition of epitaph in your album, and it's just so amazing and so rich and captures exactly all the things that you said. So I highly recommend listening to the album and specifically the song because it's beautiful. And I wish we could just have an hour to talk about Itamar Manoff, but we're not going to do that. But the poem that I chose is an Itamar Manoff poem, which is kind of a fluke because I didn't know that you would choose that one. And this one is not something that we read in the fellowship, but because I was kind of inspired by this kind of like presence of poetry in our program. When I came back to Vancouver, I started teaching Yiddish at the beginner level. And in one of my tutoring sessions with my students, I tried to find kind of a short poem that we could work with as a way to work with some linguistic aspects. And I stumbled upon this poem by the same poet, Itamar Manoff, which I was struck by. And then when we read it together, we were both kind of flabbergasted by how radical and political and feminist and amazing this poem was. So I'm going to read it also in Yiddish and then in English, and then And this is by Itamar Manoff, and the translation is by Shirley Kumov. Hart, Harz. Hart verachtende ich Harz. Lose rein die lichtige Chwalje von Säunes, Mutters und Kinder, Bettlers, Krippels und Tänzers und alte Leid von der Stadt. Nur bleib nicht mit sich und mit Gott, hart Arz, entläuft zu Menschen von Gott. In the English, hard heart. Hard, contemptuous heart. Let the bright wave in of whores, mothers and children, beggars, cripples and dancers, and old people from the city. Don't remain only with yourself and with God. Hard heart, flee from God to people.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's such an amazing poem.
It's so good. Yeah, and there's something about Itamar Manoff that is at the same time super political and super personal, and kind of in a way that when we read it with Hannah and later when I kind of continued to read her poetry, I was like, whoa. It's amazing that this kind of radical, so contemporary kind of feel was so early, right, in her work. It's amazing.
Yeah, there's so much there, and I think the experience of like, you know, for me, it's a pretty rare experience to like really sit down with an expert and like go into it, and that was just so inspiring and so valuable. So yeah, good memories.
Yeah.
I guess we
can continue with the questions. So maybe Zoe, you can start us off by telling us what cool and exciting things have you been doing since the end of the program?
Yeah, so I basically moved to Romania at the beginning of last academic year to start this Fulbright grant, and then luckily my grant got extended for another year, which is pretty amazing. So I've just been in Transylvania for most of the past year and a bit, which has been great and amazing. And I do have a blog about some of my experiences and sort of what I've been talking to people about. Just learning a lot, getting into the kind of nuts and bolts of like both the playing style and also talking to people about like the context of folk music in their lives in the past and present, and kind of the purpose of it and how they learned, who taught them, and that's all very interesting and also quite different, I think, from like my home scene, which is sort of the klezmer scene. And I have also started bringing back some of what I've learned. I was recently teaching at Yiddish New York and sharing some Jewish music from Mara Morish that I learned from a violinist there, who learned it from another violinist who learned it from old Jewish players. So that was kind of a nice golden acate happening, golden chain. And yeah, I also had this album that I recorded last year with Hungarian and Transylvanian players, and that this is an ongoing thing. I have a concert of this music coming up at the end of the month in Budapest. If anyone's in Budapest, please message me about it. So this was a sort of side track creative project, collecting a bunch of original material that I've written over the years that's all like kind of has one foot in klezmer music, one foot in Transylvanian music, and also a bit inspired by Hasidic tunes and other, genres like La Tarjaska and Magyar Nota and some of the other Eastern European genres that I like to listen to. So, yeah. What have you been up to?
So before I start, I just have to say that this album is just like out of control. It's so beautiful and so rich, and I was just like, kind of, am hooked. And I want to ask you more about it, maybe just in terms of the connection. Was the Fulbright scholarship and kind of the time that you had spent in the past couple of years in Eastern Europe connected to the album, or is this like materials that are old and there was some inspiration? How did these two kind of projects? You said it was a side project, but are there connections?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think the process of getting the album to the point where it was ready to be recorded was a pretty collaborative process over the past year. So I was like working with instrumentalists who are from this region and who play in this region style, which is pretty different from the context that most of the pieces were originally written in, which was like an American klezmer context. So it was a process of like hearing the pieces in a new way and kind of reimagining them with those local players. So yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. What about you? Tell us about Jargon and all the other exciting things you've been up to.
Yeah, so I came back from the program also very inspired and kind of full of kind of excitement. But then I was like, okay, I'm in Vancouver. It's not the center of the Yiddish world. And through kind of connections with friends who have a connection to Yiddish or Jewish identity or are interested in the history and the culture, I began just like talking about the program, and I would kind of realize that a lot of people are interested but don't know a lot, and there's don't really have access to the history, the language. So I was just like, let's do a little study group and kind of bring together some of the knowledge. There's like, I think during the year of the program, there was like so much knowledge, historical, cultural, linguistic, artistic, literary, that we were exposed to. And I was just like, that's so amazing. But I want to somehow kind of share that knowledge, that amazing kind of historical and cultural knowledge. So I kind of friends kind of got together as a group, and I decided to kind of create a little course called Jargon, A Journey Through the History of Yiddishkeit. And this is you're seeing now the poster, who was designed by my co-facilitator, Jess Goldman, who's an amazing artist here in Vancouver. And the idea was basically to sort of have something close to what we did in terms of our learning process in Helix Yiddishkeit. So a group learning process that is focused on people's kind of experiences and voices and ideas and sharing kind of a group learning process and coming together as a group with kind of external lectures, mostly online, from real experts in Yiddish history and Yiddish art. Zoe, you were like honored us with an amazing online lecture on klezmer music and even an impromptu performance, which was amazing. And the idea was basically to kind of bring people together and learn about the history of Yiddishkeit, which is under discussed in most kind of mainstream spaces of Jewish learning and culture. So that happened last year, and we had our first kind of cohort. And this year, together with Jess Goldman, who was a participant in the last one, we're co-facilitating a new program with a whole new line of guest lectures here at the Peretz Center for Secular Jewish Culture in Vancouver, BC. So that's kind of what I've been doing, and the idea was to sort of try to create continuity for myself, because I kind of wanted more of a Yiddishkeit in my life, but also to kind of share that experience with other people who didn't have the opportunity to be on this fellowship.
Well, I will say, like, from my experience as a guest in your class, the students were really engaged in an amazing way and had like some really deep questions that I hadn't even thought of even before. I was like, whoa. And I thought it was really cool how they were like coming from a lot of different walks of life, levels of knowledge about Judaism and Jewish culture, and prior engagement and Yiddish language knowledge and stuff like that. And it seemed like they all, had really built a community in the class, which is exciting and cool. So I'm really excited that you're continuing this class.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Maybe we can. Okay, so our next thing is to talk about the Helix Fellowship, which I think is relevant. Then maybe how would you explain to others what Helix Fellowship is in one sentence? It's kind of a hard one.
Yeah, so I think that this whole hour we'll be talking a little bit about what our experience was like and stuff like that. It's a little bit hard to sum up in one sentence, but I think for me, it's about physically going to these sites of Jewish culture in Eastern Europe and really having the sort of sensory experience that is like touching, grass and walking around these places and smelling the dirt. And, that's, if I could sum it up in one sentence, that is what it is about for me.
That's beautiful. So I'm really bad at summing up things. That's advice that I have. But I would say I totally kind of resonate. What you said resonates with me. And to me, kind of maybe in hindsight, thinking about the Helix Fellowship, the experience was kind of an opening up to a history, to a geography, to a culture that I just thought I knew something about, but actually didn't at all. So this sense of really opening up and like discovering so much, and also discovering how little I know actually was humbling, but also super exciting. So to me is, and the reverberations of that sense of like, understanding how little I know and how much there is to learn is something that is still kind of follows me up till now, which is great. Yeah. Sounds overwhelming, and it is, but it's also great.
Definitely agree with that sentiment as well. We are also going to share one highlight and one challenge from the trip, and this is kind of in a style of like engagement that we have in the Helix program called Council. That is just a particular way of interacting as a group, and we have like a sharing method that's called Rose and Thorn, sharing one thing that's good, one thing that's bad. So maybe I would bring up this map of the places that we went. I would say that for me, in terms of a challenge and also a highlight, the highlight would be just going to this breadth of places in a pretty short time. And really seeing a lot, seeing rural places, seeing cities, talking to people, hearing from all kinds of people, and seeing a lot. And that was also the challenge, which was like, it's exhausting. So it's kind of rose and thorn in both.
Yeah, totally. So that's always like hard to choose one thing of each. So I think, okay, my rose would be that in that travel, we kind of bonded together as a group in many different ways. And I feel like I had so many conversations with all the people, and that kind of like, there was a connection to this place geographically and historically, and to the history and to the literature and the languages, but also a connection to each other, which was, I think, an inherent part of the learning process, was learning together as a group and learning about each other. And that is also the thorn kind of embedded within the rose, because like the program has an end or a new beginning that is like a post program in which you can keep in touch and follow up, but the official program ends, and then you feel like this thing that was built and felt like home for, I think, about a year, to be honest, is kind of abruptly kind of comes to a sort of halt. So I think that was a very kind of poignant experience.
Yeah, for sure. That kind of brings us to the next question, which was there a particular place, town, or experience that stayed with you? I guess I can share mine first. And so we were talking about what we might do in this mostly unrehearsed meeting that we're having right now. And I was reflecting on how, for some reason, the experience that just kept coming back to me recently when I thought about the trip is when we went to the Volozhin Yeshiva, which was like a big center of Jewish learning. And here are some photos that I took, including, you can see here, David Schneer of blessed memory, who was a really, really special part of our trip and just, touched all of us with his knowledge and his grace and his kindness. And we all really, really miss David. So this was a really memorable day for me because I think, as you can tell from these photos, the setting in the town and in the countryside is really beautiful. You see these cows, and we're like walking around, in the hillsides and stuff. And also the town itself is really cute and has all these like sort of interesting architectural fences and stuff. And the yeshiva itself was, I would just say, like, very atmospheric. Like, you can it's a little hard to see in this picture, but there's, it's not like falling down, but it's it's in like bare shape, I would say. And we were reading some poems from Chaim Nachman Bialik, and we were going to this hill outside of town that's called Har Bialik because it's apparently, I guess, where he wrote some of the poems. Also, Claire, feel free to interject if I'm saying something that is not correct. So I think one of his poems that stayed with me was about Essen Tag, eating days, about, the experience of these yeshiva boys who were like away from their homes. They would basically like go into town for the yeshiva, and they would just be like staying at people's houses, eating their food, Essen Tag, just kind of eating these like spare meals. And he was basically like, yeah, yeshiva life was really hard and we were unhappy like most of the time. It was a tough existence, and so I think that just stayed with me because I think there's something about like being like now, living in Eastern Europe and spending more time here. I think there's something about like the Eastern European mindset that is like more maybe familiar with like suffering or just discontent than the American mindset. And I think there's sort of a sometimes contentness with being discontent. It's kind of like, yeah, life sucks, like whatever, get over it, where I feel like there's an American drive to like fix, you're unhappy, like take medication, or which is fine, but I don't know, it's just like there was something in that experience of these yeshiva boys just like going through it that really like struck something true about that.
Yeah, that's so true. And also I remember that specific day, and I remember feeling the sorrow in the poetry that we read, and also the kind of revolutionary drive. It was like, we want to break free from it. That's also something that stayed with me, that it was like, this is like on a precipice of a big change.
Yeah.
So my kind of moment that I took that I want to share was kind of an odd moment, because it was towards the end of our trip, and it was in Lithuania. And we went to a monument in a town called Zalavas, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, for Josef Piłsudski, which I hope I also pronouncing correctly, who was, I think, a Polish kind of political figure and activist, and who thought about the kind of context of Eastern Europe and Poland in a multicultural and kind of more on a socialist sense. And I remember that day we were all like just beat. It was a beautiful day, but it was super hot. And we were kind of like after a full day of activities, and Karolis, our Lithuanian guide, and Robbie talked about the significance of this place. But I think everyone, I don't know, I don't want to speak for everyone, but maybe you can see in the pictures, we're a little bit kind of like tired. And then it kind of, okay, part of the trip is like doing a lot of things and not always being kind of super on top of everything. But later, when I thought about this experience, I realized that it was actually one of the most significant ones. Because what we were talking about in that context was the phenomenon that was common in Eastern Europe, and I think in some sense still has a living tradition of what's called a tuteishi, which is people who are in the region of Belarus, Lithuania, and Poland, and other places who were kind of the place and had kind of a spontaneous, politically kind of grounded reaction against nationalism, and especially in the context of the shifting of the borders. And this is something that we learned throughout our trip, how the borders had shifted so rapidly and drastically throughout really kind of short periods of time. And then people who were kind of there and just didn't give a fuck about nationalism or the kind of top-down kind of imposition of identity, and their identity was of the place. Which I think tuteishi probably maybe in Polish or in another Slavic language has some sort of connection. I'm not really sure what the exact translation is. We also, Karolis played us a song by a Belarusian band called Nie Być Skotem, if I hope I pronounce it right, talking about, and this is kind of a folk song of the tuteishi kind of identity. And yeah, I remember that was kind of striking and interesting, but I didn't really kind of think about it much until later when I started teaching jargon. And then I came across kind of questions from participants about the concept of Doigkeit, or here-ness, that was associated with Bundism. And then I was like, wait, this didn't spring out of the blue. This was part of a long-standing political kind of tradition and identity of people who were resisting impositions of political nationalism and other types of exclusive identities, and really feeling connected to the place. And I remember, and this is something that we might have talked about, reading a text by Zygmunt Bauman, who was a Polish-British sociologist, very influential. And he talked about a census that the Polish authorities did in 1931. And they went to the countryside and asked people, what's your identity? What's your national identity? And the response was, we're from here. And they didn't understand what Polish identity meant. They're like, and the censors kept kind of pressing, but what's your nationality? And they were like, we're from here. So I think this idea of tuteishi, here-ness, Doigkeit is a real viable political tradition that in that moment we kind of like had an experience of in that kind of like afternoon. And at the moment I didn't think much of it, but then that kind of, it's interesting that these like kind of moments that aren't at the center of your attention kind of keep on going with you. And it still kind of keeps occupying me and thinking and kind of informing my research and my educational kind of interest. So yeah, that's a moment.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought up Doigkeit and also the experience of the tuteishi and listening to that song. And that just really reminded me of another place that I've been where the borders have shifted a lot and historically had a large Jewish population, which is Maramuresh, and which is in the northwestern part of what is now Romania. And I think I also have had a really memorable experience talking to a violinist there whose name is Vasily Rus Postashul. And he's talked to me a lot about how that is a really multi-ethnic area, and historically Jews lived amongst Romanians and ethnic Hungarians, Ukrainians, it's just as a crossroads and as a place that borders had changed a lot. He learned a lot from his grandfather, and he said his grandfather used to say, like, we didn't really care about a person's nationality. That wasn't that important to us back then. We just cared about like their character and what type of person they were. So I think it's been really positive and really powerful to spend time in these places where like nationalism sometimes seems to break down, especially in an environment where, like, I think unfortunately, like, part of the folk, part of being in like a modern day folk music scene is that like folk music is very easily politicized and nationalized, unfortunately. Kind of my least favorite thing about it, maybe. So I think, coming back to what you're saying about Doikite, and maybe I hadn't really thought about Doikite for like a minute, but I'm often, confronted with like very like nationalist sort of ideas. This is Romanian, this is Hungarian, this is, this is that is that. Let's put that in that box, and to come back to an idea that's like related to this idea of here-ness and connection to land or to place, or to ecology, but that's not, this sort of, you were talking to me in an earlier conversation about being like they're similar, but like one is kind of more top down, and
yeah, totally. And I think just thinking that the here-ness is also social relations, right? The here-ness is not just like the soil, but it's also who's there with you, right? And what kind of connections you have. And that's sometimes, that's exactly the top-down approach kind of tries to erase the diversity of the here, unfortunately.
Great. We have a question from a current fellow who I've been in a Yiddish class with.
Cool.
Maybe I'll read Thais's questions. Could you mention a few more of the local living scholars or figures who you met with during your trip? In addition to Doikite, here-ness, what other major themes resonated throughout your experiences? Do you want to tackle that, Itamar?
That's a good question.
Well, I would say to plug another amazing project called Following Fania. We met with an incredible, like, 100-year-old scholar and all-around amazing person in Vilnius. Fania, forgetting her last name, but Claire, feel free to intervene. Who just had all kinds of stories about, like, being a partisan in the forest near Vilna. Followingfania.com. Check that out for more information. So that's one example of someone amazing who we met with.
I think we met a bunch of interesting people. There was also this Lithuanian anarchist collective in Kaunas that we met, who are just these radical kind of feminist anarchist people who are trying to sort of make change in their country. And here's the name of Fania. I think we read quite a lot during and interacted with people during the program. We mentioned David Schneel, who talked a lot about the history. We had guest lectures by Dr. Tony Michaels, who also is a participant in this year's Jargon, about the histories of revolutionary kind of politics in the U.S. and in Eastern Europe, and more. I think there was a plethora of themes and stories. Maybe an overarching kind of connective kind of theme was really thinking about interconnection politically, culturally, and how there were alternative histories and alternative ways of thinking about the world, about politics, about nationhood, about people, happening all the time and still are happening. That's something that I think still resonates with me.
Yeah, definitely. I would say another theme for me was just like an engagement with Jewish culture in Eastern Europe, not only being like, well, this civilization used to exist and it's gone, but as a continuation, and also as just like a very multi-layered journey, I guess, through time, and an engagement with Judaism and Jewish culture as a civilization, and Yiddish culture as this really multifaceted thing that has interacted with all other sorts of different aspects of Eastern European culture, which kind of like maybe brings me to the next question. I think that sort of engagement with Yiddish Eastern European culture has really like, I don't know, it sort of like changed something in my mindset about like wanting to spend more time in Eastern Europe, and kind of like now living in Cluj, which the Yiddish name is Klausenberg. There used to be like 12% Jewish population, I think in the beginning of the 1900s, which like is now like the Jewish population of New York. So I think, and New York feels like a very Jewish place to me, and somewhere where I also lived for 9 years. So I think just like this sort of engagement with past and present, and thinking about how Jewish life and culture was really embedded in all these different levels of Eastern European society, and that was sort of an inspiration for like this album, and also wanting to do a Fulbright grant in Transylvania. So I guess maybe this would be a good time to show a clip that was supported by the David Schneer Memorial Grant. And this is a collaboration that I did with an amazing Polish-American animator named Gabriela Sibilska. And yeah, that's sort of what I've just been talking about really inspired this video as well.
Wow, that's amazing.
Thanks.
Beautiful.
I'm excited to announce that the Schneer Grant was sort of a seed to start this project, and it actually has become a more long-running thing and collaboration with Gabriela, and we are being sponsored by the Jewish Museum of Maryland to make a second video, which will include more sort of imagery from Transylvanian Jewish architecture and art and artifacts. And we're working with an amazing artist in Cluj named Razvan Anton, who is helping us find some of these artifacts and images. So yeah, I'm excited.
That's so amazing. That's like so exciting that kind of to see how kind of an inspiration, and also the storks, very important, kind of like leads and kind of continues to live on and develop. And it's just such an exciting project. So I'm so excited for you.
Yeah.
So just kind of mentioning the David Schneer Memorial Grant that I was also lucky enough to be a recipient of, kind of reminds me some of and we talked about scholarship, and specifically David Schneer. Kind of one of the things that he contributed is his immense historical knowledge, which was, to me, kind of like, again, that experience of knowing how little I know, realizing how little I know was, I remember in Ojai, he was talking about the history of Yiddish life in Eastern Europe, and then talking about just what it was and how to change, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And I was just like, wait, what? And then I just became upset. And the partitions of Poland and that entire kind of historical shifts and upheavals that shifted and changed and influenced Jewish life in Eastern Europe and up till today. Even the political movements and the changes in history and culture. So one of the things that actually kind of through the David Schneer Memorial Grant, I was able to sort of kind of explore more of this history. And if you can pull up the map with the PLC. So one of the things that I did in the introduction to jargon was kind of invite participants to put a pin on the map, on the collective Google map of where they come from. And of course, people have different heritages and ancestry. But then when we focused on what today is Eastern Europe, so Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, and Poland, I kind of overlaid the map with kind of a boundary of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Kingdom of Poland, and then kind of proceeded to talk about the partitions. And that kind of, to me, was a way to put things in perspective in a way that I kind of felt that Helix Fellowship allowed me to do for myself. And then I kind of realized, and that was kind of wild, that when I was listening to these lectures as a student, right, as someone who was kind of receiving the knowledge, I didn't really have a lot of context. And it seemed fascinating and confusing and kind of overwhelming. And I was just like, what is this? But then when I started teaching it in the context of jargon and kind of the community education, I realized that now I need to sort of start telling the story. So almost like the shift to being in the position of a teacher, a facilitator, forces you to reckon with what kind of story makes sense here? What is the thing that's happening? Now, it's not to say that now I'm an expert. I'm not an historian, and I'm not like a scholar of Yiddish studies, but it did make me realize that you kind of have to, at some point you're like, okay, this is what I understand from this immensely complex kind of world. And now I have to sort of share this, whatever I know, and still kind of keep that sense of wonder or astonishment or bafflement and be like, there's still a lot to discover. So, and it's just kind of interesting that, you know, for me, it's kind of like everyone needs to know about the partitions of Poland. It's so important. Like my crusade to get everyone on board with the partitions.
Well, I guess that kind of brings me to my next question, which was like, I just, you know, I think your whole process of putting together this jargon class, from my brief interaction with the class, it seemed like there were like maybe some things that you uncovered that might have kind of like changed your perspective about Jewish life in Eastern Europe and what it was like and how it, you know, was part of the fabric of larger communities. So I was just wondering if there was any like fact or story or anything that jumped out at you that was sort of like a changed your perspective in that way.
So I think for me, what changed a little bit is kind of maybe an overall attitude about history and teaching history and thinking about history, especially in the Jewish Eastern European context. I think until Helix, basically, I thought that there's a history and then you either know it or don't know it, and then you uncover it and then you know it. But now, specifically looking at the people that we read, the poets, the revolutionaries, the kind of scholars, the artists that we read in all these sites, they're part of history, but they were also kind of creating a new vision, right? It was very modern, it was revolutionary, it was opening up, it was imagining new ways and now it's part of our heritage and history. So there's something creative about engaging with history, with culture, with knowledge. It's not an objective uncovering of what's there, because we're embedded in kind of a dynamic process. So to me, just like kind of realizing and owning up to the fact that it has a creative process. That doesn't mean that you can get away with everything and just invent stories, but by engaging and by learning, you're also reviving and enlivening culture. And that to me is like something that I don't think I had such a visceral kind of sense of before the program, and it translates to the stuff that we're doing with Jellicoe.
Cool.
How about you? What kind of like, can you kind of trace something that shifted, an experience or something that changed?
I think the experience of like visiting some towns and cities that like at certain points in history were like 80% Jewish, and just like thinking about what that would be like was pretty mind-blowing to me. And also just the realization of like, I think in a lot of historical contexts or a lot of historical narratives, you hear about being like, yeah, Jews, they were like the tavern keepers, or they were this, or they were that. But it's like, no, they were everyone. Like they were literally doing like everything in the town, like any job you can think of, like a Jew was doing it, So that just, I don't know, that was like kind of an important moment for me. Do you have anything that you brought back from the experience that has meaning for you?
Good question. There's a bunch of things. I think mostly like the connections, just the relationships that I'm still kind of interacting with you and other friends from the program, and just keeping this sense of community alive to me is the most tangible thing that I think I brought from the program. Although I do have like a little bag with a lot of like souvenirs and like things. Mm-hmm. The kind of first thing I can think is that the kind of program lives in the connections that I've been able to maintain, and form collaborations that I've had with a bunch of people from the fellowship. How about you? Is there anything in particular?
Yeah, I would probably say the exact same thing, is like the connections and meeting the people and having this sort of like formative experience with them. People from a lot of different disciplines has been really fruitful. I guess we have one more question here, and then maybe we'll see if there's any questions from the chat.
Yeah.
What would you tell a prospective Helix Fellow before going on the trip?
Yeah, I guess we have some current Helix Fellows in the audience who are going to travel in July. What would I tell them? I don't know. I guess like be excited and come with an open mind, and be prepared to be surprised. And that's just like a wonderful thing. And I think it's also might be a little bit threatening. I think there's something about Jewish history and the way it's kind of like, at least in my context, the way I've been brought up, learning it was always kind of connected with things that are traumatic and like not hard to digest, and then like you kind of stick with one narrative and then you don't want to give it up because everything seems like, but just coming with an open mind and an open heart, and kind of trusting the group process, the council style, the connections, the relationships will just like enrich your understanding and kind of perception of what history is and what culture is in ways that are really awesome and surprising. Any advice?
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think, trusting the process, going with the flow, trying to get as much rest as you can. And also like, I guess it's kind of my own personal process, but just like document almost everything, because you don't really know what might strike you as an inspiration later down the road. So yeah. But I mean, I'm like, I was constantly journaling on the trip and like pasting like labels, and then everyone started collecting their labels and giving me the labels, and that so it becomes like a little bit obsessive, but like that's how I guess how I work, is that then, like collect everything and then later like sort through it and be like, okay, this thing was like really powerful and really inspiring, and I want to use that in some way for my work. So yeah.
Amazing.
I guess are we ready for Claire and Lisa to come back?
I guess so.
Wow.
Wow. That was amazing. That was so fun.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Oh my
this
God.
is great.
That was so great. It was really fun to hear you both reminisce, and I don't know, it just brought me back as well. So thank you for that. Claire, do you want to tell folks a little bit about applications and things?
Sure. So right now we're in the middle of a cohort. So hi to everyone who's a current Helix Fellow who's watching now. Inshallah, we will be going to Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania in July. We've obviously not been able to travel. We did have a travel plan in Ukraine for this past summer, which we of course couldn't do. And then before that was the pandemic and the protests in Belarus. So your cohort in 2019 was, I think, very lucky to have been potentially one of our last for a long time to go to Belarus. We have applications opening for the next cycle for Helix Fellows. That'll be in December this year, and that'll be the 2024-2025 cohort. And you can visit our website, yiddishkite.org/fellowship, and I'll put that in the comments as well. If you're interested in applying, or if you know someone who is interested in applying, please do. As you can see from our speakers, it's a life-changing experience.
Totally.
Yeah, so thanks so much for jumping in and being part of this new program. We kind of threw you into it, and it was really fun. And yeah, until next time, maybe we'll have you back to talk about more poetry.
Happy to.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Bye.